What if an appliance emergency didn't have to be? If your appliances suddenly decided they were done, don't stress. Best Buy has you covered with a wide variety of major appliances from trusted brands, in stock and available now. So you don't have to worry about laundry piling up, refilling the fridge, or that big dinner party you're hosting. Because Best Buy has the knowledge and expertise to get you the right appliance for your home. Learn more at bestbuy.com. Best Buy. Imagine that.
Introducing one of the favorites of tonight's show, the old American beaver hound.
He is in the care of expert handler Sanai Takaichi.
Lively, aggressive, and incredibly horny, the beaver hound is especially popular among rural white families.
That's right, and judges tonight will be looking for the hallmarks of a good beaver hound. Strong veneers, girthy cankles.
Oh, whoops. It looks like he's wandered away from his handler. That's going to cost him some points.
Okay, he looks like he's back on track now. Excellent form on that turn. And now one final trick, a leap onto the platform. And nailed it! Wow!
What a performance by the old American beaver hound.
Welcome to Quiet Riot, a politics podcast that's more matcha latte than Molotov cocktail. I'm Alex Andreou.
And I'm Kenny Campbell, more Scotch on the rocks really, and filling in this week for Naomi.
So pour yourself your balm of choice, break the seal on that tin of special biscuits, and settle down for another Quiet Riot. Hello, I'm Alex, trying to provide reason and optimism, at which I occasionally fail.
And I'm Kenny, covering for the delectable Naomi, and here to prod you wonderful peeps to back us on ko-fi.com/Quiet Riot Pod and help keep this podcasty party free for everyone at the point of consumption.
Can we first of all send all our thoughts to the people in the Caribbean who are being battered by the hurricane and all those people in the UK who might have family and loved ones out there? I know words are totally inadequate at times like these, but for what it's worth, you're in our thoughts.
Hear, hear.
Now, on this week's show, we blast off to that tortured orange world known as Planet Trump to pick gingerly through the latest chaos in search of something, anything that makes sense.
And then it's back to Blighty for a look at Britain's curious relationship with what we all call institutions and why we should be concerned about the future of some of these institutions.
To help us today, we're joined by a Quiet Riot favourite, a professor of operational research at UCL, as well as a creator of the smash hit service to humanity that is the Trump Action Tracker. Welcome to Quiet Riot, Christina Pagel. Welcome back, I should say.
Well, yeah, thank you for having me again. Things still keep happening, eh?
We'd have you if there was nothing going on. Christina, I found out to my delight before we recorded that you are as obsessed with the current season of Celebrity Traitors as we both are. Now, in order not to retread the ground we covered over the weekend, can I ask you, would you request that Claudia make you a traitor or a faithful?
Faithful.
So you would be one of those people that would say, I don't want to be a traitor? Or do you think you'd just be rubbish at it?
I don't have any objections to being a traitor. I'm just not good at lying.
You'd be a brilliant traitor in that case. We know from the TV that the ones who make the best traitors are more often than not the people who've said, do you know what? I could never be a traitor. I'm faithful through and through. Get on there. Apply for the next series now, Christina.
Can I say, Christina, if Alan Carr with the worst poker face in the entire universe and his sweating issue can do it, I think anyone can.
Yeah, but he's really lovable and likable, and
So
and
are
I'm
you.
not. In the
What are you
same-
saying about yourself?
I'm not a national treasure.
You're on your way to being an international treasure, actually, but we'll come to that in a bit. Now, can I ask you, if you thought you'd be very good at it, would you?
I like to know what's going on, and if you're a traitor, you know what's going on.
Yes, that's true. It appeals to my control freakery as well. How about you, Kenny?
Oh, a traitor through and through. Just completely. I mean, why would you join a game like that and then deny yourself the infinite pleasure of being one of the three people who pulls all the strings? Particularly with a bunch of, no offence intended, but they are idiots who are the faithful in the current series.
I can't quite believe how bad they are. Like, they're so bad at it. It's quite unbelievable.
Quiet Riot.
And so, in the United States, the madness of King Gorge continues unabated. More extrajudicial slayings of alleged drug traffickers, more states suing Team Trump for cutting funding for America's poor, huddled masses, and a government shutdown that's now a month old and the second longest in US history. As for Trump himself, well, he's been in Southeast Asia, bemusing Japan, amongst others, meeting that country's first woman prime minister, receiving a gift of some golfing knickknacks, showcasing some trade announcements, and making rambling speeches.
Hydraulic for your elevators or magnets. You know, the new thing is magnets. So instead of using hydraulic, you can be hit by lightning and it's fine. You take a little glass of water and you drop it on magnets. I don't know what's going to happen.
Lest we forget, the East Wing of the White House has been demolished since our last main show. Trump has appealed against his 2024 conviction in the Stormy Daniels hush money case, and he's still not talking to Canada because of a row over a TV advert. And late on Tuesday, the Senate voted against Trump's 50% tariffs on Brazil. And of course, we've barely scraped the surface. Christina, well, deep breath. Looking at your Trump action tracker, I couldn't help but notice how smoothly upwards the bar chart of actions per month is. Do you think that's a deliberate acceleration, or is it more a reflection of the increasing breakdown of the structures which underpin the executive?
I think it's both. I think there is an acceleration. I think, as you have one action, it then branches off into lots of subsequent escalatory actions. And so that kind of proliferates it. But I also think that over time, Trump and his team have become much more confident, and they feel much more confident in being able to act. And some of the dismantling that they've done in the first few months of the administration now means that some of the checks that they thought were there are no longer there. So they're just freer. But that said, it is kind of settling down now to, like we're logging, 10 to 15 a day. And that seems to be the kind of rate at the moment.
The business end of authoritarianism, as it were.
How many things do you do a day? 10.
In the last couple of months, Christina, well, two questions actually. What would you pick out as the biggies? And then the second part of the same question really is, do you think that Team Trump is running out of biggies to do?
Since I was last on this podcast in July, we've more than doubled. So we've added an extra 900 actions since then. But the big things are things that are just so obviously authoritarian. So the first one is the kind of militarization of domestic policing and the use of force. So, he's increasingly deploying the military inside America, targeting the Democrat cities. So since the summer, he's sent National Guard troops, ICE agents, Border Patrol units, all heavily armored, masked, etc., into LA, Chicago, DC, Portland, against the wishes of the local Democratic leaders. So they're overriding state rights and city rights. And, they're arresting citizens. There have been cases like in Chicago where literally they did a helicopter raid in the middle of the night on a tower block. Children were zip-tied naked in the middle of the night. We're hearing horrible stories of the conditions within detention centers. And then just yesterday, Trump actually boasted, if we need more, we'll send more. I can send the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines. I can send anybody I want, which is quite scary.
And if we've learned one thing in the last 8 months, so when he talks about upping the ante by using the military, we know that it's not a hollow threat. This is a real and present danger, isn't it?
Yeah, and he's normalizing it. Yeah. He's normalized having the military in it. What are we going to see come election day in a year for the midterms? Are you going to see soldiers in democratic areas by voting booths? And then you kind of already mentioned the escalation in force abroad. So they've attacked at least 9 boats in the Caribbean and Pacific since early September. They've killed over 50 people. Now, the US says they're tackling narco-terrorists. That's not a thing, by the way. But they haven't produced any evidence of it. And Venezuela, who is the country they're targeting the most, is not a big drug producer. And even if they were, it doesn't give the US the right just to kill people without a trial. And they've openly boasted, both Trump and the Secretary of War, Hegseth, about killing whoever they want. And they've just recently, this week, have sent loads of military boats into the Caribbean. And so people are really scared that actually he is going to start basically a war against Venezuela. And none of it is going via Congress. That is a really big issue. He's also weaponizing the state against his enemies. He's openly calling for prosecutions of anyone who's ever crossed him, including the former special counsel Jack Smith, the Georgia prosecutor Fannie Willis, who charged his allies with interference for 2020. He's never forgiven them for the Russia investigation in 2016. He's never forgiven them for the January 6th riot investigation. He's indicted John Bolton, who's criticised him. He's indicted James Comey. He's indicted Letitia James. And he literally goes on Twitter or Truth Social, calls for the prosecution, and then the DOJ acts. And that is about as authoritarian as it gets. And it's not just about those individual people. It's about suppressing future dissent.
Yes.
Because those people then have their lives upturned. They get death threats. They lose their jobs. They lose their businesses. They have to try and find funding. They have to find a law firm to represent them. I mean, it's incredibly scary what he's doing. And Stephen Miller, everyone's favourite racist, went on Fox last week and said that anyone attempting to interfere with their immigration operations can be arrested for criminal conspiracy. He explicitly talked about the Illinois governor, J.B. Pritzker of Target. Yeah. Basically what's happened is that, justice is meant to be about, here's a crime, we're going to find out who did it and prosecute them. And what Trump is doing is saying, here are the people I want prosecuted, find me the crime. And the Republican politicians are cheering him on, and that's really scary.
Alex, I mean, when we're talking about the political side of opposition, the Democratic fight back continues to be, I suppose it's fair to say, sporadic and really very disorganized, with the possible exception of Prop 50 in California. Could you break down what that is in really basic terms?
Yeah, so Proposition 50 is basically an attempt to redraw the congressional districts in California so that they capture 5 extra seats for the Democratic. Yeah, absolutely. And it's openly that. So there's no attempt to dress it up as anything else. The website for Proposition 50 opens with the paragraph, Proposition 50 is a direct response to a Republican power grab orchestrated by President Trump and state leaders in Texas who redrew congressional district lines to gain 5 more seats in the U.S. House of Representatives. So they're saying we're doing this to rebalance the grab they've done. There are some features of it that differ from Texas. First and foremost is the fact that it's being put to a public vote. Smart money is that it will be a landslide for yes, by the way. The main funder of the anti-Prop 50 camp ceased giving them any money about 2 weeks ago. There's been no advertising on any Californian media anti-Prop 50 for a couple of weeks. It looks like the Republicans have basically given up on losing the vote. And the other notable feature of it is that it's time limited. The maps will revert to what they are 2030, I think. So basically just after the next presidential election.
I mean, he's been pretty clever about it, I think, Newsom, and how he's designed it.
We get into exactly the conversation we were having last week, Christina. We were discussing Zach Polanski. And a lot of it came down to this, I guess, philosophical debate. Adopting the methods of the other side, does it accelerate the degradation of norms and standards, or is it a legitimate way to fight back? I guess I'm still on the fence. I get it. I get it completely why Newsom is doing that. I admire its cleverness, but I'm not sure if states end up getting into a tit for tat.
I don't feel like it's the same. I don't think he is using the same methods in the way that, say, you could say maybe Mamdani or Polanski are, and that he has specifically said he supports independent districting, that he doesn't want to gerrymander. And so he not only has he got the time limit, but I think, wasn't it designed so that it only even triggers if other states do a Republican gerrymander?
Correct.
So
correct.
He's been very clear that this isn't the democratic thing to do, in a sense. And this is like kind of break the glass in case of emergency. And so I think he's not changing the norm. I think he's trying to keep to that norm.
I don't think it's an either or either. It's quite easy to fall into the trap of saying that we need to have a pure play approach. But in the world of real politics, either or approach does nothing other than cut you off from at least half of the options that are out there, doesn't it?
I don't want to be the person in this conversation that puts the anti-view, because I'm not anti. I am genuinely on the fence and sort of struggling with it a little bit. I wonder how effective it can be when Trump has captured the Supreme Court. I wonder whether it will end up going to the Supreme Court, and due to some technical pretext, the Supreme Court will say everything Texas has done is absolutely fine. Everything California has done, we're throwing out. I'm not sure where this raising of the stakes goes next. But I do agree with the sentiment that there needs to be a raising of the stakes from the Democratic side, because their response is so flaccid that I'm kind of glad someone is doing something, I guess. Christina, I wanted to ask you something equally technical, but just as important. The way Trump is paying troops during this government shutdown. Can you break that down for us a little bit?
Yeah, so the shutdown started on the 1st of October, and basically that means there isn't any authorization to use federal funding from that date. About a week or two later, Trump said that the Department of Defense /War should use all available funds to pay troops. And then they said they found about $8 billion in unused research money, which they could use. But federal agencies under the Constitution cannot spend money that Congress has not appropriated. So Congress hasn't said you can use it. And you're not allowed to change its purpose either. So you can't take money meant for research and spend it on salaries without the approval of Congress. In contrast, the White House has refused to extend what are called SNAP payments. Now, these are food stamps for low-income households, and about 40 million Americans rely on them. And they've refused to extend those, arguing that it can't do so without congressional appropriation. And at the same time, they also accepted this private donation from a Trump supporter, Timothy Mellon, to pay the troops. Now, it's about the principle of it, of somehow the military being paid for by a private person that's coming via the leader.
Yeah.
There's a reason you want your soldiers to be paid for by the state.
Exactly. Where are their loyalties if their money is coming via private individuals? And maybe that's the point, actually. Because I have also seen some, not conspiratorial, some serious people saying, well, maybe that was the point of the shutdown. Trump can now pick and choose which bits of the state go on under his complete control and which bits are allowed to wither away.
Quiet Riot. If you've shopped online, chances are you've bought from a business powered by Shopify. You know that purple Shop Pay button you see at checkout? The one that makes buying so incredibly easy? That's Shopify. And there's a reason so many businesses sell with it, because Shopify makes it incredibly easy to start and run your business. Shopify is the commerce platform behind 10% of all e-commerce in the US. Sign up for your $1 per month trial and start selling today at shopify.com/promo. Go to shopify.com/promo. Quiet Riot.
Kenny, Christina mentioned the Illinois governor, Pritzker.
Yeah.
He said last week, he gave a quite extensive interview to The Atlantic, which I thought was very good. And he said that, and I quote, authoritarianism comes fast. And if you're not willing to push back in the early days, it gets a lot harder later. Now, there's no doubting the general principle, but is his diagnosis that this is still the early days, right?
I mean, we're 20% or so through his second presidency. That's not, in my mind, early days, not by any definition. I agree with the thrust of what Pritzker was saying, but the patterns are absolutely crystal clear. You only have to look at Christina's Trump tracker to see the sort of story that it's telling. The Bannon approach of flooding the zone. And the thing about that is that even if we do view this as being relatively early days, the vandalism that's occurring to the pillars on which democracy in the United States stands is going to tie up the system for months, and let's be honest, years probably. So early doors or not, the damage in many ways has already been done, and it becomes increasingly more difficult to be able to fight on all the fronts that have been opened.
You're right, there has been so much damage done, but as you said, it only gets harder. The longer it goes on, the harder it gets to roll back or to rescue what's left. And so in that sense, I can kind of understand the messaging about the early days is that you have to say that the best time to act is now, and it will stay now. Like, at some point you have to act. And I think him kind of saying it's early days is trying to encourage people to believe it's not too late. Because otherwise, where are you?
Yes, because otherwise you go into a kind of fear paralysis where you accept that this is now happening, it's irreversible, and there's nothing you can do about it. So yes, from that point of view, it makes perfect sense. Now, Trump is off, meanwhile, on his tour of Asia. It's rather reignited rumors, I think, about his cognitive decline. That video of him just wandering off when he was meant to be inspecting Japanese troops has gone viral, and his speech to the crew of the USS Washington seemed unhinged, even by Trump standards. And let's have a little listen to just a smattering of things he told Korean Parliament.
In July, I proudly sounded law. It was very important. I went into the archives. We looked at every possible thing you could look at. And what they need more than anything is electricity. So if a country was able to do that, it would be, pretty unusual. I came up with a concept when they build this the size of Manhattan. These plants are the biggest. I've never seen anything like it, actually. Nobody has. But I let them build their own electric. They're sort of becoming an electric producing company in addition to all of the other things that they produce, including information. We should have the lowest interest rates of any country, because without us, there are no other countries, really. I mean, the whole thing falls apart. We're going to go back to the way it used to be. When we announce good news, the stock markets are going to go up. And that's the way it should be. And we're going to really ride that very hard. Iser Bajan. If you look at, just take a look at that one. That was going on for, I think, 38 years, right? And President Putin called me. He said, "It's amazing. It's amazing. We couldn't get that war stopped." Prime Minister Modi is the nicest looking guy. He says, "Oh, and he looks like you'd like to have your father, like, he's a killer. He's tough as hell. No, we will fight." I said, "Whoa, this is the same man that I know." And they got approved and they got built. They're massive plants and they're doing unbelievably. They're like LNG, big, it's like the Empire State Building lying on its side. I looked at it. I said, "What kind of a building is that?" All it's got is pipes going back and forth. I never saw anything like it, but whatever it is, it works. And yet, 1 year ago, it's not long ago, I was campaigning. We didn't win. We were campaigning, and then we had the election, and we had a great election, and the spirit depressed. They were very depressed, and they had a right to be.
Christina, for a while, I think you have leaned, and correct me if I'm wrong about this, towards the view that behind the seeming chaos, there is a methodical implementation of Project 2025, and you have actually used the tracker to match it directly to what that said would happen. But can the strongman figurehead just be swapped out? Or would Trump seriously declining be a fatal blow to the project?
I think they still need Trump. I think he is suffering from some cognitive decline. He still doesn't look frail in the way that Biden looked frail. However much we say he's a madman or he's completely unhinged, he still has charisma. And I just don't think anyone else among his allies has that. And then the other issue is that he inspires fear because what he's so good at is targeting his enemies. And that's a lot of what's kept people in check, and especially Republicans in check, is this fear that he's going to mobilize against them for the next primary or whatever. And I don't think there's anyone else who can really do that in the same way. And so to replace him, I think you need to be much more sure of your levers of power and much more sure that you control the information space. Now, they're getting there quite rapidly, but I don't think they're there yet. But I do think they will be there by the time of the next presidential election.
The point you make about fear, I don't think can be overemphasized, Christina. Ed Luce in the FT last week wrote a piece, and it's worth quoting part of it. What he wrote was, "What's changed is simple. People are scared of crossing Trump this time." In researching this piece, I interviewed dozens of figures, including lawmakers, private sector executives, retired senior military figures and intelligence chiefs, current and former Trump officials, Washington lawyers and foreign government officials. Such is the fear of jail, bankruptcy, or professional reprisal that most of these people insisted on anonymity. Now, this was in spite of the fact that many of the same people also wanted to emphasize that Trump would only be restrained by powerful voices opposing him publicly. At times, it's felt like trying to report on the politics in Turkey or in Hungary. Can I ask you both if you think that we've reached a tipping point of some sort where there isn't actually enough juice in the democracy tank to resist this? Or do the No Kings protests point to resistance now being very much in the hands of the people?
I think what you're saying is that powerful people are being silenced and corporations and media and universities are kind of capitulating. But I don't think it's too late. The No Kings protest saw 7 million people all over the country. And there was actually an academic study done by Chenoweth and Stefan, and they coded over 300 resistance campaigns across the world over 100 years or so. And basically what they said is that when you have at least 3% of the population participating in non-violent protests, they were almost always successful in regime change. And that's about 12 million Americans. So I feel like it is doable. I think there are two issues. One is that for a lot of people, it just doesn't feel real that this is happening in the States, especially people in it.
Yeah.
And I also think that the people who would risk the most, they're not evenly distributed across the US.
The other thing that I would add to that is because of the federal structure, I think, of the United States, I've read a couple of pieces of, I think, quite smart analysis of, for instance, Proposition 50 in California that suggest part of what's going on in California is essentially testing the proposition of putting votes out to the people to diverge from the federal model in a temporary way, right? And that is actually the bigger threat to Trump, because if Proposition 50 passes, then maybe in a month's time, the next proposition would be to divert federal taxes that would have gone to the federal government from California. And California is one of the states that cross-subsidizes many of the more Republican states. So you can divert federal taxes into, for instance, taking over the food aid program, the stamps program that you were talking about, Christina, and saying, if the state has shut down at the federal level, then my responsibility as governor is to feed the people of California. And I'm not going to be paying taxes into the federal coffers that then do not come back. So you could see a more significant breakdown of those financial federal relationships.
And people are kind of calling it kind of soft secession almost, aren't they?
No, that's absolutely right. Kenny, always a tough one when we're talking about America to find a call to action. Do you have something for our listeners?
The challenge is for most of our listeners, I suppose, that America is simultaneously both really very far away and yet very, very near to us in so many ways as well. So this call to action is about an organisation that operates in both the United States and in Europe. It's called the Centre for Democracy and Technology. The CDT brings together policymakers, scholars, public interest advocates and industry leaders, and they all seek, I suppose, practical solutions to the policy challenges that surround technology in particular, to help align technology policy with civil rights, with civil liberties, and with democratic values. You know, this is very, very important stuff. Their areas of interest take in some of the most pressing topics, including elections, including democracy, including privacy, equity in civic technology, and AI issues as well. So visit their website. We'll stick links in the show notes. They're at cdt.org and cdt.org/EU, and just see, if you like, what they do.
And of course, we will also drop a link to Christina's project, the Trump Action Tracker, in the show notes so that you can go and have a look at this fantastic dashboard they have. They really could not break everything down more simply, succinctly, and visually accessible. So it's really worth going along and having a look.
Quiet Riot.
Okie dokie, it's, well, you know what it is. It's time to find out what's been bringing the fash out in a rash. It's time for Wokie Dokie.
Wokie dokie.
Alex, what set the woke warning alarms off this week?
I mean, I am happy to do it, although I feel that with Christina being a professor of operational research and an EDI lead and doing so much to defend liberal values, I'm basically doing so in the presence of the professor of woke.
Let's get T-shirts made with that on it.
But I did catch the most extraordinary conversation late last week on GB News between Michael Portillo and the author of a new book on the whip's offices and how they operate. And let me just play you a little bit of that.
So when I was in the whip's office, blackmail was used to persuade people to vote the right way, and there were even occasions of physical violence as punishment for not voting the right way. Do you think over the last 30, 40 years, whipping has been affected by wokery and political correctness? Has it changed?
It's definitely changed. I think that's one way of looking at it. And it's nice to hear your honesty as to what used to happen, Michael. Some of your colleagues are a bit more obtuse about the past practices. I think undoubtedly it had to change with the amount of scrutiny that there now is on what happens in Parliament. And with social media, you know, an incident like some that used to take place, you wouldn't be able to get away with it now. And I think you're right. You know, these days it's as much about supporting MPs and putting an arm around them as it is cajoling them and bullying them. And I suppose we can debate as to whether that's a good thing or not.
Is he actually saying, debate whether it's a good thing that they don't physically man hands on MPs into the right voting
and blackmail them? Yes, that was the thrust. that was the thrust of the conversation. Has wokery basically broken the good old days of being able to mete out corporal punishment to MPs who didn't vote the way you wanted, or blackmail them or physically bully them? And I watched the whole thing in disbelief at the idea we're having a debate as to whether a workplace should be free of blackmail and physical intimidation as a possibly undesirable effect of political correctness. I mean, I don't even fucking know what's going on, to be honest.
Oh my God. I suppose that in the spirit of Quiet Riot, I'm trying to think of what the flip side of that would be.
Yeah, please don't. There isn't one. There really isn't one, let's not both sides this one.
Quiet Riot.
Breathe deep. Imagine your legs more limber in Duluth Trading Double Flex Denim. Envision euphorically squatting for that can of suds, bending for your toolbox in a state of bliss, lunging for your laser level on a whole new level. Relax and allow the flex to fill you with ability. Find your inner flex in Double Flex Denim only at Duluth Trading.
Quiet Riot.
It is a rather hackneyed balance of idealism and cynicism to say, hope for the best but prepare for the worst, because it implies that one is only an active agent in defensive preparation, while the best outcome is something that should be left to magical thinking. A report co-authored by our guest today, Ian Martin McKee, puts forward a subtly but I think radically different proposition that by building up defenses against adverse conditions, against the worst, one can make the best or better outcomes actually more likely. Without a basis of evidence, there is no evidence-based policy. Without a common framework of accepted fact, there is no rational debate. The undermining of expertise and its institutions is one of the key preconditions of authoritarianism. And everything we discussed in the first part demonstrates just how quickly a coordinated attack on structural vulnerabilities can really degrade institutional guardrails. So this report identifies a set of arm's-length bodies, ALBs we'll call them, their vulnerabilities and how we can act to protect them now. And the debate goes further than that. How much more vulnerable would the UK be to executive overreach with its nexus of conventions that depend on good chap notions? What can we do to proactively pile higher the sandbags of democracy, not because we have resigned to the idea of some far-right flood, but because it is historical fact that far-right floods occasionally happen.
You're in a fundamental situation here where whether you choose violence or not, violence is coming to you. You either fight back or you die. You either fight back or you die. And that's the truth.
Today, Elon, I think the British public are telling the world that they're ready to fight back.
Good. Yes.
Come on, Great Britain.
On the other hand, the last few years also show a reflex to overprotect institutions, or more accurately, to protect them in the wrong circumstances, from grooming gangs to the post office scandal, from Hillsborough to Grenfell. This can heighten the sense of public disillusionment and be weaponized by far-right populism. So not only are we not building sufficient flood defenses, those we build seem to protect entirely the wrong things. Christina, give us an overview of the report's findings, first of all.
Yeah, so we concentrated particularly on institutions that do either produce scientific data or use scientific evidence for policy, or that generate the evidence that you need to hold government to account. So like Office for National Statistics, for instance. And when people talk about kind of institutions being vulnerable, the first thing people think of, they mean to kind of being abolished. And that is a risk, especially for ones that don't have an Act of Parliament underpinning them, where it's quite easy to remove them. So like the Met Office doesn't have an Act of Parliament underneath it, nor does the UK Health Security Agency, which is responsible for our public health and pandemic threats. And we saw that during COVID, when the government got rid of Public Health England pretty quickly and without any public scrutiny. But we found other really important areas of vulnerability, kind of learning a bit from what's been going on in the US. So a really important one is who gets to appoint the leadership of these bodies. And this is a really key thing that's happened in the US, where we've seen institutional capture. And at the moment in the UK, most of these public bodies have ministerial appointments. And you do have a public selection process. You do have independent expert panel that can select and shortlist. But ministers now have the right to ignore the shortlist and even to appoint people who are considered unappointable. And that gives them potentially a lot of power and influence over what happens to those bodies. Another one is kind of who gets to decide on the priorities. I think kind of in an ideal world, government would set the overall strategy and the independent bodies would work out how best to meet that. But there are kind of concerns that for some of them, there's real micromanaging going on. And for instance, the UKRI, which is the big government research funder that spends billions of pounds every year on scientific research, a review in 2022 said effectively it was an instrument of government and short-term political goals because it was being micromanaged over its priorities. Funding is a massive one. So we've seen that in the US, where a lot of institutions have had their funding completely slashed. So for instance, there's no state-funded climate change research now in the US. And we see here that a lot of bodies are entirely dependent on their ministers for funding, and it's an annual funding, so they can't do any long-term planning. And that is a real vulnerability. Freedom to publish is another one. So although most public bodies are free to publish, and for instance, for the Office of National Statistics, its freedom is enshrined in law. But some aren't. So Natural England can only publish through its parent ministry, DEFRA. And a House of Lords Select Committee actually recommended a few years ago that they should be allowed to publish independently because it's stifling them. But that hasn't happened. And then about accountability, who are they accountable to? So if you're directly accountable to Parliament, so you send your report directly to Parliament, you have more independence than if you have to go via your minister. And so they're these kind of different things. And if you're vulnerable across many of those different areas, then actually you're pretty vulnerable. And there are some that are vulnerable across almost all of those. So like UK Security Agency or the Met Office or Natural England. Where we are is that if no one exploits those vulnerabilities, it doesn't really matter, right? You can carry on, you can kind of muddle through. But if someone comes in and deliberately wants to exploit them, then we could see the arrangements we have to deliver expertise independently from politics can be undermined really quickly. It's like kind of if you leave your house unlocked and the door open, it doesn't matter until a thief comes to play. But when they do, you wish you'd done something.
I mean, this is fascinating stuff, Christina. It really is. A couple of questions just on the back of what you just said. First of all, is there a definition of what an institution actually is? And secondly, I suppose some people might struggle with the idea that protecting an organisation like the Met Office is an action that protects liberal democracy. Could you explain a little bit more about that as well, please?
On the first question of the definition of institutions, so there are lots of different technical ways they can be set up. I think one of the issues is they're kind of done ad hoc, like we need this and then they'll set it up. And so there isn't this kind of consistent way of doing it. And the Institute for Government have written a lot about this as well. In the second question on how it protects democracy, well, to me, information protects democracy and expertise protects our way of life. A lot of the functions of the state, things from food safety to regulation of medicines to protecting our health to weather forecasting, they require expertise, and they require expertise that politicians don't have, and why should they? And that's why you have those functions delegated to public bodies, and that they should be able to operate according to the facts and not politics. So, you can elect a vaccine denier, but it doesn't stop vaccines working. And to me, like, politicians can choose to ignore public bodies or to sideline them, but public bodies should still be able to use evidence and science and data to explain what's happening to us, whether that's economic stats or life expectancy stats or food quality or water quality. We, the public, have to have information on which to decide whether our government is governing well. And we can then choose to vote for a government, say, that has an anti-green agenda for a whole host of reasons, but that is an informed vote. But if that evidence is suppressed or never even produced, then you lose the ability to make an informed choice. And to me, that is profoundly anti-democratic. So that is my argument.
And the steps that you recommend, how sort of quick and easy would they be to implement? And I've got to ask, do you think there'd be a big price tag attached to them as well?
I don't think there's a big price tag. No, I don't think it's about money. It's about political will to give up power from the executive, which very few governments are willing to do. Some of the changes, I think, are quite simple. So, for instance, it was only in 2017 that ministers got the right to override selection panels for leadership appointments. I feel like then it shouldn't be that hard to reverse that, and it's very popular with the public. You kind of have longer term aims of putting key public bodies on a statutory footing, like the Met Office. And that wouldn't be just about giving them legal protection. It's about defining their remit, defining their right to publish, defining who gets set their priorities. Now, that takes time and effort, but I don't think it's necessarily that expensive. But funding is hard. Like, I don't think in this day and age with the current budget, you're ever going to get the Chancellor to agree multi-year ring-fenced funding for these bodies. I wish you would, but I feel like that isn't really realistic at the moment. But there is a change that's completely free, and that's to shift the conversation. I think politicians and the media are very keen to jump on our institutions and bash them for bureaucracy or whatever. But I think instead we could start supporting them. We could start recognizing the work they do to keep us healthier and safer and more informed and support and explain to people what they do and why they're there. And I think most people don't even know that the Met Office is an arm's length body, for instance, or don't know that the UK House Security Agency is. And it's about kind of saying this is what these do and this is why they're doing it, and changing the conversation around it so that it's not just about bashing unelectable quangos or whatever.
It's interesting that thinking back, giving operational independence to the Bank of England, for instance, cost nothing, wasn't in the Labour manifesto, I think, and is credited as one of the better parts of Blair's and Brown's legacy in those early years. This could be good for the government as well, because they are looking for things to do that don't cost a lot of money, but signal to the country that they are reforming things. And so in that really general way, I think it could be very good for them.
Alex, do you think the UK would be more or less vulnerable than the United States is to a Trump-like figure rising?
Difficult again, because of our constitutional setup, because of this supremacy of Parliament, and the way Parliament has been captured by the executive through the whipping system. I can see a situation where a reform party with, let's say, the same number of MPs as Labour has could really impose incredibly fundamental changes to our constitutional setup on a simple majority. And that, to me, feels very unsafe. And so that's one of the ways in which we would be more vulnerable. Another of the ways, and we saw that prodded extensively by the Johnson administration, is this idea of conventions. A lot of stuff relies on people voluntarily doing the right thing, voluntarily sacking the minister that's breached the code of conduct rather than the ethics advisor that said the minister breached the code of conduct, as we saw in the case of Priti Patel. And so that's another huge vulnerability. I guess one of the ways in which we would be less vulnerable, we saw that play out with the Liz Truss interlude. Because we don't directly elect a prime minister, because the prime minister's choice is left to parties, we do see that if someone starts doing properly mad shit, parties do remove them quite shrewdly and without hesitation. So I guess that's one of the ways in which we might be less vulnerable, that you wouldn't need some criminal impeachment process to remove a prime minister. All it takes is for them to lose the confidence of their own MPs in a way.
On that, Alex, I just have a question for you. So I thought with reform that it was set up as like a private company. And so I didn't think there was a mechanism for reform MPs to remove Farage as leader. Is that wrong?
There isn't a mechanism in the same way that there isn't a mechanism in the Labour Party. The leader and deputy leader are directly elected by party members, and that's that. But there's always a mechanism because you can lose a vote of confidence in the House of Commons and then you're done.
Okay.
So you're right in that the 1922 committee, where people put in letters and then it automatically triggers a leadership contest, is not present in other parties. But the ability of the House of Commons to lose confidence in someone and vote against them is always there. I'm not saying it will always work. I'm saying that is one small advantage that we do have over the American system, where the president is directly elected, and basically the only circumstances in which you can remove them is if they've done something criminal according effectively to their own party, when the Republicans hold majorities in both the House of Representatives and the Senate, which is very, very difficult in the current circumstances.
Quiet Riot.
This podcast is brought to you by Carvana. Carvana lets you buy your next car on your terms. Explore a massive inventory online, filter for what matters, and find your perfect match. Then choose delivery to your home or pick it up at one of Carvana's iconic car vending machines. Every car also comes with a 7-day money-back guarantee, so you can make sure it's the right fit. Buy your car on Carvana. Delivery or pickup fees may apply. Limitations and exclusions may apply. See our 7-day return policy at Carvana.com.
Carvana. Quiet Riot.
Kenny, can I ask you something? As I mentioned in the introduction, we defend institutions too little, but also often too much. What do you think is at the center of that conundrum, where a sort of defensiveness seems to kick in only when an institution has done something really dodgy?
I mean, that's a difficult question for a midweek. The thing about these institutions is they're at the centre of all our lives. They're almost like family in a strange way. And as we all know, families can be a bit tricksy sometimes. But equally, there's that idea that blood is thicker than water. These are our institutions, though. We've all got a personal investment of some sort or another in them. And I think that makes the decision-making process on an individual level just that little bit more fueled by emotion. They're our institutions, and that's really why we care about them. It's why we love them sometimes. It's why we get furious about them sometimes. And it's why we're quite irrational about them sometimes.
It's internal threat rather than external. It's like I can criticize my sister all day long, but if you criticize my sister...
Don't you dare!
Yeah, maybe there's something to that. What do you think, Christina?
I think it's also that there is, for people working within some of the institutions, say if we're thinking about some of the big scandals of the last few years, whether it's, grooming gangs, Hillsborough, Infected Blood, Grenfell, you see what happens when the state is responsible both for, or at least partly responsible both for the original tragedy and then the response to that tragedy. And there's basically a conflict of interest. I think people have an instinct to be collegiate to their colleagues, and they feel like they don't want to throw them under the bus. And by doing that, they throw victims under the bus. And it's happened over and over and over again. And the people who should be having this duty of candor and actually wanting to find out the truth are instead more worried about protecting their institutions.
Do you think the duty of candor, which is part of this new sort of suite of things that are coming in, do you think that will make a difference? With both my former legal hat on and as a former civil servant, that seems to me a really profound and positive change.
If you look at the charter that was adopted, and it has things in it which I think are brilliant. It's things like a direct commitment to put public interest above, it says our own reputation. And then it says approach public scrutiny with candor, make full disclosure, care about the truth, I think it's amazing. I think ultimately you need people to put that into practice. And that's where I think the weakness is. I think it is people. So, like before you talked about the US Constitution. The US Constitution is a really strong document and it has separation of powers, but the people responsible for those powers are not using them. And so you can kind of see how you can have this system that looks really strong, but the weakest link is, will anyone actually do it?
What do you think about calls, recently from George Monbiot, for instance, who make the case for urgently codifying a UK constitution as a sort of extra protection against the possibility of a future PM Farage?
I'm not a constitutional expert, I can say that. My instinct has always been to be pro-constitution and anti this kind of norms, just people voluntarily abiding with norms. However, I have read analyses of his argument where people have said that if you're going to do a constitution, you have to do it really, really carefully. You have to have mass support of the public, and doing it as kind of an emergency measure that looks as if all you're trying to do is hobble an incoming government is not the way to do it and would actually be counterproductive. And I kind of find that quite convincing.
I find that very interesting because looking at the creation of constitutions that I would see from a jurisprudential point of view as successful, they are created at moments of maximum coming together of a nation rather than maximum division. And constitutions that are created at moments of maximum division tend to last a very short time. The other thing I was wondering is these sorts of issues, like the rape gangs inquiry or Grenfell or the post office scandal, we are seeing, I think, more and more their politicization. There was an extraordinary press conference earlier on in the week with Farage sharing the stage with one of the victims of the rape gangs that had quit the state-sanctioned statutory inquiry and instead appeared with Farage to make some points which I thought were directly political. She was even answering questions that were actually Reform UK questions directed at Nigel Farage. And I found that quite uncomfortable. Let's have a little listen to that press conference.
I find it quite, overwhelming as well that every single one of these medias has said something about a comment that was made by Sarah, which is understandable, absolutely fine. Yet it's taken medias decades to recognise grooming gangs that are coming over and raping our children because they're white. That is also racially motivated, and it is racist.
100%. 100%. 100%. Gosh, that's very strong. That is very, very strong indeed. Mari Novick, Financial Times. No, well done, you're quite right.
Can you just explain when you two first got to know each other?
No. Right, moving on to Will Standring of Bloomberg News.
This kind of Wild West atmosphere where everything is fair game to make political points, does that complicate what needs to be sorted out further? And can it be reversed in any way?
I think that the problem that you have in that specific example is that when you have people and communities who have been totally and utterly fucked over by the state for years, and then they find someone with a platform, you can see why that's very tempting.
I should make it very clear that this wasn't a criticism of Eliane Reynolds. If I were in her position, I would take every megaphone that was offered to me. Rather, the seasoned, media-trained, responsible politician shouldn't really be putting someone like her in that position. That was my feeling.
But what I'm saying is that I think because those two things have wins for both sides, or apparent ones, Farage gets something out of it. She feels like she has this platform. I don't know if you can reverse it.
On that, Kenny, as a former newspaperman, do you think that the current media environment is actually in some way contributing to this or deficient in doing its job? And is that a matter of personnel? Is it a matter of culture, attitudes, or is it more systemic? Is it to do with basically ownership structures?
Well, all of the above. I mean, media cannot absolve itself of responsibility. It's quick enough to claim credit where credit's due. It should take and must take responsibility when it falls short, as it has done. Now, despite the rise of social media, I think it's fair to say that significant parts of our media landscape, if you like, including institutions, media institutions like the BBC, are still stuck in a cycle that in many ways is reminiscent of the 1970s. The front pages of the Mail, the Telegraph, the Times will in no small way influence what appears on BBC Radio 4's Today programme in the morning. That will then help inform what BBC and other news bulletins cover during the rest of the day. Mm-hmm. And that in itself will lead on to reactive pieces the following day. And so the cycle changes. I think what has changed, and I have to be wary of putting on rose-tinted glasses with this, but I do think what has changed is that there's now, in some corners of the media, no attempt whatsoever to disguise what's going on. And I'm quite happy to name the likes of GB News and indeed the Mail, whose front pages, more often than not these days, are editorialising above journalism. It's very much a reflection of what we were discussing earlier about Trump. Again, no attempt to disguise what's going on whatsoever. Now, look, it's always been the case, certainly for the last 150 years anyway, that manipulation of an audience goes on amongst media and media barons as well. But the sleight of hand that was once, I think, very, very important, at least when we're outside of an election cycle, that doesn't seem to be valued at all. There's no sleight of hand. It's all in your face every single day. And one last point I should make, and this really winds me up. Finding someone to blame is not the same as finding out the truth. And that applies to the media just as much as it applies to politicians and everybody else involved in this cycle. Finding someone to blame is not the same as finding the truth. Rant over. Maya Angelou once wrote that hope and fear cannot occupy the same space. Invite one to stay. So a question to all three of us, I think. Let's challenge all of us. What would we each choose as a green shoot for optimism? Do you want me to go first, or one of you?
Yeah, go for it.
All right. I think mine's an ever-present green shoot, and that's the relentless inevitability of change. One day we will wake and Trump and his ilk will not be headline news anymore. Now, whether that's because of the people opposing him, despite the risks, or because of the grinding passage of time, or a combination of both, nature will eventually bring this disgusting chapter in human history to a close. So Trump can ramble all he wants, as can those like him. He can bully all he wants, but the cycles of power and weakness, the cycles of relevance and irrelevance, the cycles of life and death as well, they're not trifling things. I do want to say that doesn't mean that we should lessen our efforts. I mean, quite the reverse, because we're all part of the coming change, and it is coming.
And I think this is what I really like about Christina's campaign, it's never nihilistic.
Well, I hope not.
It's empowering. It's saying, this is what's going on, and armed with this information, there's stuff you can do. That feels like the opposite of passivity.
I'm a fixer by nature,
Yes.
I'm one of those people, they could come to me with an issue. I'll be like, right, what can we do? Let's do something. I'm generally quite an optimistic person. One thing is that, people in the UK, if you look at the polling, they don't want extremist policies. We're not an extreme country. You wouldn't know it if you only go on Twitter or you only look at the Mail or Telegraph. But, for instance, only 3% in the British public, when they were polled, said that no one should have indefinite leave to remain. And then in the recent Welsh election, people don't want reform either. To me, that is hope. The things that we see that I think are really dark and authoritarian, that's not what people want. And they're willing to show it at the ballot box.
I'm on the same page. Again, I looked at a piece of polling, for instance, that prodded the question quite directly of whether Reform UK, its policies and its voters are generally racist. It was quite overwhelming, yes, from ethnic minorities, but there was also a plurality of white people who thought that Reform UK's policies and Reform UK as a party are generally racist. And again, the Caerphilly result indicates that there is a basic decency that people coalesce around. And I think that's where the answer lies. You cannot take control of this country on a third of the vote if the other 2/3 of the vote don't want you to and get their act together. And I find that quite comforting, especially considering how sophisticated people are becoming about looking at data and choosing to vote strategically. We see that increasing more and more with every passing election since Brexit, really. I think Brexit was the big wake-up call that if you are a little bit apathetic and if you don't turn out to vote, then the more motivated side that feels passionately about the opposite result, they will turn out to vote. And I think that's changed the country's psychology with regard to voting in various fundamental ways. But one of them is the idea that I may not be sure about the person I'm voting for, but I'm really quite sure about the person I'm voting against.
Okay, Alex, that's us almost done with the institutions of this country. Have you got a call to action for our listeners?
Read Christina's report on this and share it with MPs, with other people in position of influence, with anyone you can to alert them to this piece of work and what needs to happen. And so we'll drop a link for that in the show notes.
Quiet Riot.
I think we could all do with a little bit to relax us because it's been quite an anxiety-inducing episode, and for good reason. And so to our most gentle feature, wherein we park our politicking and sideline our sarcasm, it's time for Grin and Share It.
Good news is welcome to me. Bad news is hell come to me. Good news. Do-de-o-do-lo, I want good news.
Kenny, our resident Dua Scotsman.
Not bad, Alex, not bad.
What rainbow-coloured portrait of joy will you paint for us this week?
Dire Scotsman incoming. Well, in the last few weeks, we've banged on a ton about how AI, is about to nick our jobs, flood the media with deepfakes, and generally out-gaslight the gaslighters. But, deep breath, there is some actual good news from Planet Algorithm. It turns out that while some tech pros are busy teaching machines how to write opinion columns and fake Taylor Swift endorsements, there's a far more useful crowd, and they're teaching AI how to save the planet. There's a woman who goes by the name of Priya Donti, and she co-founded something called Climate Change AI. Priya is one of a growing tribe of scientists and coders who've decided to stop doom scrolling and start debugging. Instead of asking, can ChatGPT write a novel? They're asking, can machine learning stop the planet melting? And it turns out it can, at least a bit. AI can now predict floods. It can track illegal logging. It can optimize renewable energy grids, making things like wind farms and solar plants run smarter, not just harder. Imagine a digital Greta Thunberg, but one that runs on data instead of oat milk. So, Priya Donti's team is building tools that can, for example, stop power companies wasting energy when demand dips, a problem that by itself adds tons and tons of unnecessary carbon to our atmosphere every single day. It's kind of like AI learning to turn the lights off when it leaves the room. Climate Change AI has partnered with global research institutes to make big data work for climate action. Here's a little stat to warm your eco heart. The International Energy Agency says that smarter energy systems could cut global emissions by a mighty 10% over the next decade. That's significant. AI, like politics, is not itself inherently evil. It's just that too often it's pointed at the wrong things. And when you aim it at the right ones, clean energy, biodiversity, sustainable agriculture, and such like, it stops being the Terminator and it starts being more like an intern who's actually done the homework. And so, if it can help us keep the lights on without cooking the planet, well, that's the kind of machine uprising we can probably live with. And if we can just get it to sort out the bins, we will really have cracked it.
I knew you were angling for Nick Clegg's job.
But Naomi, it's not true.
Yeah, that sounds like a genuinely positive story. And I was actually reading another one only a couple of days ago about how AI can go through thousands of scan results and be much more efficient at detecting cancerous cell patterns early. And so, yes, you're right. When you point it at the right things, it can be transformational in the right way. So we'll pop a link in the show notes. And listeners, please keep sending us your uplifting stories via all the usual ways. And that's all we have time for today. We have hugely overrun, as usual. A huge thank you to Christina for really being so stimulating a guest every time she's been on. Thank you, Christina.
Thank you for having me.
And we will be back with Sunday School for our weekend listeners. And if you're feeling generous, why not head over to ko-fi.com/Quiet Riot Pod and back us for as little as $5 a month, so that we can keep producing the show free of charge without threat, Traitors fans, of either banishment or murder.
Stay faithful, stay safe, and keep quietly rioting. We love you lots. Bye.
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 Quiet Riot is an audio production by Cooler Heads with Naomi Smith and Alex Andreou. Produced by Kenny Campbell. Music by Mariana Sangita. Artwork by Simona Canelu. And edited by me, Alex Reese.
Quiet Riot.
What's astonishing about Prunella when she plays the Queen is that somehow she's more like the Queen than the Queen herself.
So that if one comes across a painting with the right background and pedigree, Sir Anthony, it must be hard, I imagine, even inconceivable, to think that it is not what it claims to be. And even supposing someone in such circumstances did have suspicions, they would be chary about voicing them. Easier to leave things as they are, stick with the official attribution, rather than let the cat out of the bag and say, here we have a fake.
My mother was given a CBE a few years ago and it was presented by the Queen, who leant over to drop it round her neck and said rather charmingly, I expect you think you ought to be doing this.
Audrey, any news? Oh dear, he hasn't. Oh, I know. He doesn't deserve you, Audrey. He really doesn't. Exactly. I know you have. I know. I know. Oh, I know.
If Basil's awful behaviour was just gratuitous, and very few people understood this, it was nothing like as funny as when you could see that it was coming out of this terror of what would happen if Sybil found something out.
It's really quite gratifying when people come bouncing up to you in the coffee break and saying, nobody has ever said that to me, either during my training or during my working life, and thank you, thank you, thank you, which suggests to me that in a very limited way that one has got something to teach and that one should do that, one should transmit it before one dies because it may be useful and it's important.